Good evening, everyone. This is our discussion for Anubhav paper 4. This is the CSAT discussion. My name is Aditya Jagtap. I will be conducting the passages or the VA section of the paper, conducting the discussion for these. Uh, for each question type that we see, if it's a new or if it's the first time we're discussing a question type, I'll briefly go through the question type and then we'll proceed to discuss each question. So, the first question that we have is a practical implication question. In the practical implication question, this is a 2020-2021 innovation by UPSC of sorts. This is a slightly different question in the sense that for all questions, we are supposed to use the information only within the passage, but this is a different question. This sort of breaks those rules. What I want you to remember is each time you see the word practical implication, this kind of a phrase, right, in a question stem, what you're expected to do is if you have, let's say, this is the passage, if you have this information, if you had this information, what would a well meaning, intended, well intentioned, well meaning state actor do? State actor matlab you can represent the government, you can maybe represent the army, you can represent the judiciary. But if you are a representative of the state and if you had this information, what action would you take? Now, because this sort of violates the normal rules, you'll notice that these options, even the ones which can be right, are not mentioned in the passage directly, but they are practical actions that a state actor would take if they had this information. Okay, so that's the practical implication question type. Let's start with the first question. Um, in green, in each passage, I've marked the main point of the author. I want all of you all to also follow a similar marking system so that while reading, you know exactly what the main point of the author is. Here, the author is discussing that water is obviously life sustaining, but it can be hazardous if it's contaminated, and the potential for it to carry contaminants. Uh, it enables water can dissolve and carry harmful pollutants. Rainwater also collects pollutants. Local pollution can have far reaching global consequences because rainwater goes everywhere. So essentially, pollution spreads through water. Now, if you had this information of pollution spreading through water, what would be a practical action a state actor would take? The first one, strengthening regulations on agricultural runoff, can help reduce water pollution at its source. Now, if you notice, we are told in the passage about contaminants carried into rivers, waters, groundwater systems, and including agricultural chemicals here. So that means if there are regulations on agricultural runoff, it can reduce water pollution at its source. This is a practical action that a well-meaning state actor would take. So one is valid. Two, implementing urban wastewater treatment systems can prevent contaminants from entering natural water bodies. So we are told that, of course, pollutants are entering the water cycle, and urban areas have been mentioned here, right? So this would be a valid action that a well-meaning state actor would take. And three, also promoting watershed level management policies can address pollution across interconnected water systems. They are interconnected, that's why far-reaching global consequences are mentioned here. So three is right. Four and five are incorrect because four says specific restrictions on natural water cycle processes can effectively control. The author has nowhere implied or suggested that restrictions on natural processes can help, right? So that would be invalid. That's not a action that a well-meaning state actor would take. And focusing only on one aspect is sufficient is invalid. So the right answer here would be B, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, let's see question number 2. Question number two, the question type is the crux of the passage. Crux means main point of the passage. Main point is asked many times in the exam, and there are different ways to phrase this. Main point would be in this case, I've marked those words in green, but the main point is one message that the author has. We want to look for a possibly acceptable replacement of the main point, meaning one of these options, here clearly option A, would be a good replacement, a somewhat acceptable replacement of the author's main point. So let me explain the main point. Geopolitical tensions are there in the Gulf. This makes the global energy supply chain vulnerable. India relies heavily on this supply chain. So, because India's supply chain is vulnerable, India is actively pursuing diversification of the energy mix by investing in alternatives. Solar is a central pillar in these alternatives. Then the author in this central part of the passage gives us the challenges with solar. And finally, we're told, thus, while solar energy remains critical to India's sustainable energy future, addressing infrastructure and grid integration challenges is essential for maximizing its potential. So, solar is really important, but solar has challenges, grid challenges, infrastructure challenges, etc. Okay, so the main point of the author. Let's take a look at option B first. India has reduced fossil fuel dependence. This is not the case. We are told India is actively pursuing. Also, it's not the main point of the author. The main point of the author should say India is looking for alternatives. Solar is an important alternative, and solar has challenges. So we need an option which will suggest something like that. B is invalid. C says large scale solar projects are more efficient than rooftop installations. So no mention of are more efficient than. C would be invalid. And D says geopolitical tensions highlight the need for diversified and secure energy sources. Now, I've left option A out of discussion so far because I wanted to compare options A and D. I know many students have gone with D as well. What I told you at the start is we are looking for a possibly acceptable replacement of the main point of the author. Okay. Now, both A and D are problematic in some way. A is problematic because solar expansion is vital, is correct. Constrained by transmissions is correct. And integration challenges is correct. What is missing is India. No mention of India. The main point is specifically recommending what India should do. So, no mention of India. D says geopolitical tensions highlight the need for diversified and energy secure sources. D is also valid. But D is a simple fact: geopolitical tensions, vulnerable global energy supply chains being restated. It is not the main message of the author. So, out of the given four options, A is the best possible choice. It's not the ideal choice. We want the words India to be included, but they're not, or India is relying heavily, should be included, or India is trying for alternatives, should be included. These words are not included in option A, but is the closest possible choice. Now, same passage, two questions. By the way, UPSC has been doing this in the recent few years, that they give us one passage and two questions based on the passage. Here we are asked for inferences. Remember that whenever you have these multiple statement questions, use the answer key whenever possible. In this case, it's not really possible. Even in the first question, it wasn't really possible to use the answer key as a shortcut. But we'll see if we can use the the key here as a shortcut. We'll try that, or the options as a shortcut. We'll try that in the questions to come. Inference: India must prioritize energy security due to its import dependence. This is true. To address this, it become an economic necessity. So the word necessity allows me to say must prioritize. It's a necessity. Two, solar expansion creates challenges in grid integration. This is valid. Grid integration is mentioned here as a challenge. Transmission gaps delay efficient evacuation from solar parks. This is also a valid inference based on delays in evacuating power. 4 says diversified energy mix reduces vulnerability to supply shocks. Basically, 1 and 4 are the same option. They're restated in different ways, but they're the same thing. And 5 says solar reduces the need of additional transmission. Reduces the need of additional transmission. So 5 is invalid. C is the right answer. Inferences, by the way, I just want to highlight, are fresh conclusions derived from evidence. We have to find evidence in the passage and then we have to derive fresh conclusions. So C is the right answer. Let's see the next one. Which statement best restates the central message? So another main point question asked in a slightly different way, but the question type is standard main point. Numerous nations have committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions. So, carbon emissions to be net zero, as many countries have committed to this. For this, households will need to take some actions. This will come from changes in individual behavior. Individual behavior plays a significant role. But for this to work, low carbon choices, more affordable and accessible to the public, are needed. People need more choices and more affordable choices for them to make this change in individual behavior. So A says net zero goal relies mainly on personal lifestyle changes. So if you notice, which means that emissions will need to be reduced to almost zero. This does not mean net zero goal relies mainly on personal lifestyle changes. There are two reasons why mainly on personal lifestyle changes is incorrect. One is because mainly here is uh, implying that other factors don't play a role, and it's not the best main point of the author. The main point of the author should include the fact that people need these options to make those changes. So, simply saying net zero goal relies mainly on personal lifestyle changes is invalid. Option B says system level support is more important than individual effort. This is obviously factually incorrect, does not capture the main point. D says government actions can ensure net zero. This is also invalid. You need even businesses and including investments, you need more technology available. So multiple factors are needed, not just one factor. So again, invalid. C is the correct answer. Net zero goal needs both behavioral change and structural support. Structural support is essentially restating these parts of the passage, right? So C is the correct answer. This passage is a philosophy passage. It does not mention any philosophy as such, but it still, I think, can be considered as a little tricky to read. Uh, I've marked the words which indicate why the author is discussing this. What is the main point of the author? Uh, the author is recommending philosophical thought or a philosophical approach as a good or a positive approach in life. Philosophy begins where certainty ends. Philosophy challenges us to confront what we take for granted. It refines our thinking. Philosophy is not detached from everyday life. It sharpens our awareness. It gives us tools to navigate complexity. And with philosophy, you can cultivate a thoughtful and examined way of life. So there are multiple other sentences which I have skipped, but what I do in this reading process and I mark it in this fashion is I mark only those specific words which will communicate the main point clearly. Anything that is adding unnecessary complexity, I read it, but I don't necessarily mark it. I just mark the parts which make clear sense, which clearly exhibit the author's intention. Okay, the question type is an assumption question type. With inferences, I told you inferences are fresh conclusions derived from evidence from the passage. So think of an inference like, if this is the passage, we use two facts in the passage and we come up with a fresh new fact. Okay, this would be an inference. An assumption is telling us there are two facts located in the passage. Can you notice any connection between them? Is there any underlying assumption between these facts? So, an assumption is contained within the passage. It's trying to check how two facts or two pieces of information in the passage are connected, right? So, valid assumption is underlying the logic of the passage. It is the logic of the passage that is contained in it but not mentioned explicitly. The exam will never ask you the distinction between inferences and assumptions, but I'm making it clear so that you know exactly what to look for. So, the passage is the same philosophy, and philosophy is recommended. Let's take a look at the assumptions. One, human beings often live without critically examining their beliefs and assumptions. Now, this is slightly tricky because we are making a general statement on human beings often living in this fashion. If you notice here in the passage, we often unknowingly engage when we decide what is fair, meaningful, or true, we engage in philosophical inquiry. So, we actually, if you take a philosophical approach, you can end up with having meaningful or fair philosophical inquiry. That means that if we do not take the philosophical approach, we don't critically examine our beliefs and assumptions. We often live without critically examining them. So, take a look at option one. It's the opposite of this option, meaning that if we do not take up physical inquiry, if we do not think philosophically, we live without critically examining our beliefs and assumptions. Two says, so one is a valid assumption. Two says philosophy provides definite and universally accepted answers. This is obviously incorrect. Three says philosophical thinking plays a role in everyday decision making, even if people are unaware of it. So it will help us navigate, it equips us to navigate complexity in life, in multiple things in life. So three is valid. Four, rapid technological advances reduces the relevance of philosophical inquiry. Nowhere in the passage has this been suggested. If four is invalid, two, B and C are gone, and two is invalid, D is gone. The right answer is option A only. Let's see the next one. Here we are asked to summarize the passage. Okay. So one moment. Two questions based on the passage. First was an assumption question. The second one is a summary question. A summary question is a little like the main point question in the sense that we are trying to include not just the main message of the author, but the entirety of the passage, all the important bits of the passage that were there. UPSC has frequently asked summary questions in the past. So let's take a look at why these options B, C, D are incorrect. I would consider question 12 to be a difficult question, especially because of the options. B and C are easy to eliminate. B says, engaging philosophical inquiry sharpens understanding of values, knowledge, finances. So, this sharpens understanding of finances. This would be invalid. The author has not suggested that it will sharpen understanding of finances specifically. So, by mentioning this word, I would be adding an inaccuracy to the author's message. Although the author has said it will help us in life in general, and finances are a subset of life, finances would be a subset of life. But that does not mean that I can give this as a point in the summary, meaning that if I include finances here, that would corrupt or pollute the author's original message. So option B is invalid. Option C says philosophy balances skepticism and reflection, questioning certainty, while guiding meaningful decision making in organizations. Another part which is not stressed upon by the author. So B and C are eliminated. These are somewhat easy. Option D was a little harder to eliminate. Critical thinking through philosophy navigates moral, correct. Epistemic, many of you may not know this, but epistemic would mean about pursuit of knowledge, and existential certainties. So, philosophy navigates, let me cancel these words. Existential certainties would be invalid. Philosophy navigates, helps us navigate uncertainties, not certainties, but uncertainties, right? So, here the word certainties makes option D incorrect. If this said uncertainties, it could have been the right answer. So D is invalid. A is the right answer. Philosophy interrogates assumptions. What are valid, invalid assumptions that we may have? Cultivating reflection, it helps us be more reflective, more thoughtful. Ambiguity, it interrogates ambiguity, or and it gives us more tolerance and reasoning skills without promising definitive resolution. So there are no definitive resolutions. It helps us confront what we take for granted. So A is the correct choice. All right. So the most pragmatic message is the main point of the author. What would be the main point of the author? Here, the main point is fairly easy. This exact message passage, the exact main point type passage, has been asked by UPSC before many times. Like in each paper, you'll get one or two questions addressing this. Different regions of India confront unique environmental challenges. Recognizing these regional variations is essential for formulating effective policies that balance environmental protection, economic growth, long-term resilience. So really easy passage, really easy message. If you notice, options B, C, and D all have some problematic phrase. Harnessing renewable energy is the sole solution. Invalid. Only Himalayan regions require urgent attention. Invalid. And uniform climate change impacts are uniform across India. They're identical. So B, C, and D are invalid. The right answer is option A. Each region in India faces unique environmental challenges, must adopt strategies tailored to its natural resources and vulnerabilities. Very easy. UPSC has given these one-line passages or sentences before. So we have a similar kind of question here. By justice, I mean the deliberate creation of conditions in which individuals can pursue their potential without fear of oppression or arbitrary restriction. Really easy passage. Assumptions I already explained to you. We are trying to see what logic is underlying this passage, what logic is contained in that passage. So one says true justice requires providing conditions that enable personal growth. So this is really easy to check. This is valid. Requires is correct because deliberate creation has been mentioned here. So requires is valid. Justice is mostly about punishing wrongdoing. Mostly about punishing wrongdoing is incorrect. No such mention in the passage. Justice involves freedom from arbitrary restrictions. So arbitrary restrictions are mentioned. Freedom is the underlying assumption, and it's a valid underlying assumption. So creating a condition in which individuals are not afraid of oppression or arbitrary restriction would mean involves freedom from arbitrary restrictions. So the right answer is option D for question 14. Let's see question 21. Question 21 is implied. Implied implications are inferences, essentially suggestions made by the author. AI has transformed industries, improved efficiencies, but there are concerns. AI can be used as weapons. There are ethical concerns. There can be misuse, misinformation. This is bad for democracy. It can undermine democratic processes, cause social instability. And what the author recommends is, this is the implication part. What about this? That AI is dangerous, AI has ethics, and a specific recommendation that we need effective frameworks, governance, ethical International cooperation is needed, is essential. So what we need are frameworks and cooperation to make sure that AI benefits humanity without causing harm. Fairly easy passage. A says potential dangers of AI primarily stem from inadequate regulatory ethical oversight. So regulatory and ethical oversight are needed, but the dangers are not primarily from lack of regulation. That's not the primary reason for danger. So primarily stem is invalid. C says the complexity autonomy of AI systems make harmful outcomes unavoidable. This opinion has not been given by the author. And D says AI driven risks are comparable to other technological risks. No mention in the passage. So the right answer is option B. Option B tells us although AI has inherent risks, so there are inherent risks such as destructive consequences, weapon systems, like there's a list of risks. Its negative consequences can largely be controlled through responsible design, regulation, and governance. So I can say essential to ensure benefits, etc., etc., which means that, let me rephrase the last line of the passage as X, Y, and Z c- can help us ensure, essential to ensure, can help us ensure. So X, Y, and Z can help us ensure. That means the negative consequences can largely be controlled. I know the words inherent risks and largely be controlled are problematic, and these would have pushed many students in other towards other options. But option B is the correct choice in this case. Okay. Here we are discussing the main point is global demand for natural resources has increased. Very little of this, the use of material is recycled. Critical minerals such as lithium, cobalt, nickel are resources. We extract these resources. We are told here the concerns about extracting of these resources, what all challenges are there. So the author makes a recommendation which is developing efficient systems to collect, process, reuse these materials is essential. Close the loop so industries can move towards a sustainable approach. So fairly easy passage. Let's take a look at what assumptions can be valid. Industries and consumers will adopt recycling and material recovery practices if systems are efficient. I know some of you have chosen B here based on will adopt. Now, if I say that industries and consumers will not adopt if systems are efficient and cost effective, that would negate the passage. We are told that companies that rely on such supply chain face growing risks, both ethical and financial, as consumers and regulators demand greater accountability. So we are told industries, meaning companies, also will adopt this because there is pressure, ethical and financial pressure from consumers and regulators. And consumers will also because consumers know the danger. So, based on this line of the passage, I know that this is an acceptable underlying valid assumption. Option 1 is the right answer. Dependence on mine resources poses both economic and environmental risks. Everyone has gone with option B at least, which includes 2 and does not include 1. So we don't need to worry about uh, option 2 as much. It's really easy. Option 3, efficient recycling and material recovery systems require coordination. Uh, so this takes place across sectors. So require coordination across industries, government, and supply chains. This is valid based on the passage. So right answer is option D, 1, 2, and 3. Option 1 with will adopt recycling was a little tricky, but options 2 and 3 are fairly easy to find in the passage. D is the right answer for question 22. Question 23 is the same passage about recycling. What is the message of the author? Pragmatic message. Here, message should also have been in orange. This is a main point of the author type question. uh, D says reducing consumption of raw material is the most practical way. not stated in the passage, invalid. Reusing battery materials is a desirable but limited solution. Again, not a message given by the author that the solution is limited in some way. Long-term sustainability depends primarily on improving mining practices, primarily on these two things, invalid. So B, C, D are invalid. A is the right answer. Expanding recycling systems can partly ease supply and environmental pressures. This can partly happen. So A is the correct answer. Overall, I would say this so far the question, apart from one question that I mentioned, the other questions have been easy. Let's take a look at question 31. AI is expected to become deeply embedded in everyday systems. There'll be complex ethical dilemmas about this. This UPSC has asked in the past. This was asked as a uh, autopilot or automatic driving car question by UPSC. Here it's asked in a more broader way that if it's used in hospitals, if it's used elsewhere, what could happen if AI is used elsewhere? Determining responsibility becomes challenging. Uh, Unresolved questions will increasingly influence policy investment and public acceptance. So, because AI is going to be baked into everyday systems, expanding across borders and sectors, these unresolved questions will increasingly influence because AI will be embedded in everyday systems. All right, fairly easy passage. We're looking for inferences, which are fresh conclusions derived from evidence found in the passage. One says global AI deployment will force nations to reconcile differing ethical standards and regulations. So, will increasingly influence policy. So, will force nations. One is valid. Two says accountability ambiguities may slow public adoption and trust. So, public acceptance would be dependent on whether questions are resolved or not. So, valid. Two is valid. Three, widespread AI integration could reshape societal norms. So, this is obviously going to affect society. It's embedded in everyday systems in society. Mm, I'm looking for, there's an exact word which indicates that there is mention of society. In a globalized world, we can infer societies existing based on a globalized world. Okay. Four says AI commercialization will inevitably increase legal disputes over flawed or biased algorithmic outcomes. Will inevitably increase legal disputes over, especially this is invalid from the passage. Right answer is option B, 1, 2, and 3 only. So, same passage, a different question. Now, at the start of the discussion, I mentioned to all of you all that we have to take a look at the question stems in the paper, uh, and I'll especially discuss question stems which involve something new in it, like practical implication question stem that I showed you at the very beginning. The first question was practical implication. Here you have the author would agree with all the assumptions below except. This is really important. Now, many of you have probably gotten this question incorrect because you didn't, either you did not notice this word or you didn't pay attention to what it expected from us. It expected that there are three valid assumptions which are not the right answer here. We are supposed to identify the invalid assumption. So, if you notice, AI integration will require coordination. This is a valid assumption from the passage because multiple things are involved. Let me actually tell you. So, technology, the engineers who designed the algorithms, and so this is the line which is talking about will require coordination between technology and human expertise. This is the line which is talking about engineers who designed algorithms. It includes humans and technological expertise. B says cross-border deployment of AI increases potential for international regulatory conflicts. This has been discussed in the passage. Complicated in the globalized world. C says public acceptance of AI depends on transparency, perceived fairness. Public acceptance depends on whether the questions are resolved or not, whether there is fairness in the system. D says AI implementation will eliminate human decision making entirely in certain critical sectors, not mentioned in the passage. D is the invalid assumption, and D is the right answer. A, B, and C can all be valid underlying assumptions. Option D is an invalid option, and that's the answer. So D is the correct answer. Notice this question stem. I expect one of these questions to be asked like this in the exam. At least one, by the way. UPSC has asked two or three before, but rarely. One is what we can expect. Which among the following is best implied by the passage above? Passage above is talking about the change in the wider Indian Ocean. It is traditionally dominated by UK, US, and Japan. Now, there's emerging naval forces. Emerging naval forces like India. This like India part is important because of the options. We'll get to that. China and UAE. And this reflects a decline in global security, according to the author. The region serves as an early warning sign, intensifying militarization of the region. The region here is wider Indian Ocean region. Signals deeper strategic competition and evolving security dynamics. So, what is best implied? What is the best implication made by the author here? Emerging naval powers are reshaping India's control. India, this is the reason why I said like India is important here. India is considered one of the emerging naval powers in the passage. Emerging naval forces like India. So, emerging naval forces are reshaping India's control would be invalid. B. Incidents in maritime spaces usually indicate impact on broader geopolitical and security trends. Here, the word usually indicate impact is incorrect. It's true in the case of the wider Indian Ocean is an early warning sign, but we can't say from the passage that this is a usual scenario. C says the navies of India, China, UAE can now compete. We have not discussed the navies now competing. We have discussed them becoming maritime powers based on naval forces, but that does not mean the navies can compete against each other in toto. In this region, the naval forces of India, China, and UAE are present and emerging, but can now compete is invalid. D says militarization and strategic competition reflect declining global security stability. This is valid. Decline in global security stability. Option D is the correct choice for this question. Question 33. Let's take a look at question 41. The main point of the passage here is there is an inherent tension between technological advancement and social inclusion. Technology evolves based on profitability, scalability, and user demand, and not on the principle of equal access. So, as technology develops, access does not necessarily develop. A society committed to inclusion may need to actively support access because it doesn't automatically develop. Education and infrastructure to ensure that technological progress benefits all, not just those who have the capacity to partake. Okay. Question 41. According to the passage, market driven technological systems cannot ensure inclusive development as. So, market driven technological systems cannot ensure inclusive development. This is what is told to us, inherent tension between technological advancement and social inclusion. As individuals lacking access may be excluded. This is valid. Some people may be excluded. This is written in the passage multiple times. Two, technological innovation always leads to equal participation. This is totally invalid. So one is valid and two is invalid. If you notice from the statements here, if one is valid and two is invalid, All we need to do is check statement 4. Statement 3 is also valid. Economic social disadvantages limit the ability of some groups. So this is the same as statement 1. And statement 4 says periods of disruption and job displacement may widen existing inequalities. Again, stated in the passage. So option B is the correct answer here. What, based on the same passage where the message was technology and social inclusion don't go hand in hand, and inclusion may need to actively support access. We are being asked practical implications. I already told you when it's practical implications, we should take actions like we are a well meaning state actor, a well intentioned state actor. Question 42, whoever solved this and went through all the statements, please take a look at statement 1. Investing in digital infrastructure to provide free internet access nationwide is needed. Free internet access nationwide. Now, what you have to do at this point is you go and look for free internet access nationwide. Many people lack access to devices, stable internet. This does not mean free internet access nationwide. So, free internet access nationwide is invalid. If one is invalid, you don't need to solve the question. You can simply go with option B, provided you check whether this is valid or not. Don't simply say, "Arey free to galat," and move to option B. That's a bad habit and you'll make a mistake in the exam. Checking this will add maybe 5 to 7 seconds in real time. 2 is valid because implementing education and digital literacy is needed. This is what a well-meaning state actor would do. Subsidize devices because access to devices is lacking. Regulations. Now, this is an option. I know this question, many of you may have gone with option D also, but regulations on private tech companies are not stated in the passage to prevent exclusion of workers. This kind of a regulation has not been discussed in the passage at all. So this is not something that a well-meaning state actor would do, is add regulations on private industry. So 4 is invalid. 5 is right. Support for reskilling initiatives should be provided. So skills should be provided. So the right answer is option B. If you solved this correctly and if you paid enough attention to statement 1, the question is really easy and you would save a lot of time, because actually to cancel out or eliminate option 4 takes a little bit of time. You have to go through the passage and realize regulations on private industry or private tech company has not been suggested or recommended by the author. So B is the right answer for question 42. Question 43, which of the following best captures the central idea? Central idea has been marked here: triple planetary crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. They're all deeply interconnected and increasingly severe. So it's a vicious cycle between these three. Climate change influences of plastic behaves, makes it more harmful, while pollution and biodiversity loss intensify climate change. So they're systemic, these problems are systemic, they require coordinated global action. What is the main idea? Main idea should mention interconnected, increasingly severe planetary crisis, right? So take a look at option A. Climate change is the major environmental issue. Invalid. The passage is discussing three interconnected issues. So central idea cannot be one thing being the major issue. Climate change is more harmful, causes all other environmental issues, not more harmful, major, invalid, not the main point of the author. D, biodiversity loss has no significant impact on human life. Factually incorrect and not mentioned by the author as the main point. So B is the right answer. It says interconnected, increasingly severe, so require collective action. Option B is the correct choice. Let's take a look at question 44. Again, the same passage for triple planetary crisis. We are told that it's an interconnected issue and it's a vicious cycle. Again, we have valid underlying assumption except. So that means we have three valid assumptions and one invalid assumption. This is what we are searching for. They all impact each other. Valid underlying assumption. Human activities are a significant contributor. Valid underlying assumption, we are told in the passage. And D, ecosystems can help nature regulate. The ecosystems can help nature regulate would be valid because it's a interconnected and increasingly severe problem. So A, B, and D are valid underlying assumptions. They are not our answer. C is an invalid assumption. Based on solving one issue can be sufficient. Invalid. So the correct answer is option C here. C is the only invalid assumption. This is what the word except would mean. Whoever got this question wrong once or twice, this question type wrong once or twice, just make sure that you're reading the entire question stem. Whenever you encounter a question stem, these are question stems, you want to make sure you know what is being asked, right? So if it looks new, invest a little bit of time to figure out what exactly is being asked. C is the right answer. Let's take a look at question 51. We are told the main point is global economy has shown resilience, but there are many challenges. Growth is uneven across regions. Developed economies are slowing, developing nations are struggling, but it's uneven. One of the key reasons, this also should have been in green, key reasons is persistent inflation and rising cost of living. This is the key reason for the problems, especially for uneven growth. There's also geopolitical tensions. So the main point of the author is, thus, while the global economy appears stable, underlying challenges such as inflation, debt, and geopolitical instability highlight the fragile and uncertain nature of economic recovery. So, what is our underlying assumption? What can we find within the passage? What is the logic underlying the passage? One says moderate economic growth usually indicates good economic health. These words usually indicates good economic health. This is a invalid assumption. This is invalid. Now, if one is invalid, the right option is B. We didn't really have to take a look at options 2, 3, and 4. 2 and 3 are valid from the passage. Inflation disproportionately affects vulnerable sections of society. By the way, you should always check this. This is a valid option in this case. Sometimes UPSC will give this even when this is not mentioned in the passage. This is suggested particularly for low-income populations. So it's valid underlying assumption. Geopolitical tensions have direct impact. Have led to increased. So have led to means they have a direct impact. High public debt has little effect on a country's development capacity. 4 is invalid. B is the right answer. Again, if you solve this correctly, you would not have to go through 2, 3, and 4 and waste time. But that means when I say solved it correctly, that means you notice this, you check whether it's valid or invalid in the passage. And when you're 100% sure that it's invalid, only then eliminate these and go with B. Only then. Otherwise, it's a bad habit. If you don't check, it's a bad habit. B is the right answer. Question 52 is the same passage, and we are asked to make inferences, valid inferences. Let's take a look at A. Global economy is steadily improving and is largely free. This is totally opposite to the passage. Developing countries may soon overcome challenges. Again, totally opposed to the passage. D. Inflation is a long-term concern for nations with low costs of living. In the passage, we have not discussed nations with low cost of living. We have discussed rising cost of living nations, right? So D is also invalid. I know many of you have gone with D. There's nothing wrong with C. C is the right answer. Investments can improve policies. If investments can improve if policies are stable, right? What we need is stable. Thus, while global economy appears stable, we need stability in policy and non-protectionist policy. I'll tell you the exact line. Facing headwinds due to policy uncertainty and rising protectionism. So, investments can improve if policies are stable and non-protectionist, right? Here is investment. C is the correct answer. I know many of you have gone with D, but low cost of living nations are nowhere discussed in the passage. C is the right answer. Question 53 is about CRISPR-like technology, gene editing technology. It can treat genetic disorders. It can give people personalized medicine where specific individual genetic things can be treated. But there are also challenges of misuse, ethical concerns, and there may be a cost problem. The access may be limited only to a few people. So equitable access is a problem. Again, the reason why I've not marked these options 2, 3, and 4. If you notice this word, will significantly improve health outcomes for all. This is an invalid assumption. Again, if one is invalid, you can go with option C here. I've pointed out two cases where we can actually solve questions correctly provided we check option 1 or more options, but you have to check, right? So it'll improve outcomes for all would be invalid. Equity is a problem. So C is the right answer. Three ethical regulatory frameworks are necessary to manage new tools. So why is 3 invalid? No mention of regulatory frameworks or ethical frameworks. Notice that because it's been discussed in prior passages before, ethical or rather regulatory frameworks have been discussed in some passages before. We feel like this sounds right, but no mention of regulatory frameworks within this passage. So 3 is invalid. I know many people have gone with D in this case. It's an incorrect option. C is the right answer. All right, let's take a look at question 61. The main point is fairly clear. Countries are increasingly investing in solar, wind, other alternatives to reduce dependence. Transition is gradual, faces challenges such as high initial costs, technological limitations. So these are the challenges to transitioning to clean energy. Again, a passage type which is asked many times by UPSC. B says rising oil prices strain developing economies alone. This is incorrect. This applies wide, widespread economic implications. So we can't say developing economies alone. Developing countries are mentioned, but that does not mean this applies to developing economies alone. So B is incorrect. C, transitioning to renewable energy can eliminate the risks. Totally incorrect. And D says the oil price surge is a result of temporary supply disruption. Could be right. And can quickly normalize. Totally incorrect. Not mentioned in the passage. So A is the right answer. Despite growing investment in renewables, short-term dependence on oil will continue. So we are told transition to cleaner energy is gradual and faces challenges. So short-term dependence will continue. Option A is a textbook definition inference. If you say transition to clean energy is slow, that means short-term dependence on oil will continue. This is what a fresh conclusion derived from evidence looks like. That is what a textbook inference looks like. A is the right answer. We're looking for assumptions. Let's take a look at the main point of the author, which is the same thing. Transition to cleaner energy is gradual, and countries are trying to invest in three things: solar, wind, and other alternatives. Again, we have a set of options which here you had to go through three, but if you went through the three, then you could skip going through four if you went through these carefully. One says living costs are impacted by oil prices. This is valid, higher cost of living. Existing technology limits clean energy adoption. So there are technological limitations. So existing technology limits is a valid underlying assumption. So 1 and 2 are valid. 3 says developing countries are more vulnerable to trade deficits. I know many of you have made this mistake and gone with either A or B because you didn't read it fully and went through and checked for trade deficits. Trade deficits may be mentioned in the passage, but we cannot say that they are like developing countries are particularly vulnerable as their trade deficits widen. This is, let me mark these words again. Developing countries are particularly vulnerable as their trade deficits widen. This does not mean developing countries are particularly vulnerable to trade deficits widening. This is incorrect. It's not that trade deficits widen only or mostly in developing countries. This is an invalid assumption. Please reread these words again if you find this confusing. But they are particularly vulnerable as their trade deficits widen. So 3 is incorrect. And if 3 is incorrect, again, you had to invest a little bit of time to figure this out if this is valid or not. And once you figure out that this is invalid, that they are more vulnerable to trade deficits is incorrect, then D is the right answer. I know many of you have gone with either A or B, but D is the right answer. Okay. We're talking about India's healthcare expenditure here, and it's lowest in G20 countries. Where it's concentrated in urban areas. NCDs, non-communicable diseases, are not covered well in government policies. India has a mental health crisis. There's a shortage of mental health professionals. India requires a multifaceted strategy, integrating various strategies such as preventive care, expanding coverage, embracing technology, addressing social determinants of health. So, multiple things have been recommended. This can help build a resilient, equitable healthcare system yielding benefits for future generations. Another practical implication questions where we are supposed to take actions like a well meaning, well intended state actor. You're taking well intentioned actions on behalf of the state. One says setting up an extensive network of affordable rural healthcare clinics is needed. The current healthcare is concentrated in urban areas, leaving rural areas behind regarding access to quality healthcare. So, one is valid, one is an action a well meaning state actor would take. By the way, we don't have to use our own knowledge like, oh, but this already exists. This is my own knowledge. I don't have to use my own knowledge. All I have to say is, if this, let me mark it in red. If this, whatever this is, if this problem exists, okay, and to this problem, these possible solutions exist. What well meaning action can a state actor take? That should not be like, oh, पर ये तो already है, इसके लिए कोई scheme है, medical national scheme है, state scheme है. We don't have to think on those lines. A well-meaning state actor would take this action. 2 says training and certification courses for mental health professionals should be made available. Again, we should not say कि यार ये तो है already available. A well-meaning state actor would make these available. UBI should be given to citizens to help with expenses. Yeah, this is incorrect. We are talking specifically about healthcare expenses, right? So if you said healthcare insurance should be given to citizens, that would be valid. But a universal basic income is about income for all purposes. So this is invalid. We can't say income for general purposes should be given to help with expenses. So 1, 2 are valid and 3 is invalid. Now, in this case, there are still two possible outcomes, B and D. And since there are two possible outcomes, we still have to check option 4. 4 says privatization of healthcare should be promoted, especially in urban areas. Privatization, especially in urban areas, is incorrect. Urban areas, healthcare facilities concentrated in urban. So invalid. Right answer is option D. A focus policy should be formulated to focus on non-communicable diseases. All right. Question 71, we're looking for a corollary. A corollary is a conclusion. It's a inference type, but it's a conclusion derived from the main point of the author. Conclusion based on main point of the author. Okay. So let's figure out the main point. Nuclear energy was earlier strictly state controlled sector. Now India has opened the civil nuclear power sector to private participation because country has changing needs. The success of this transition will depend largely on reforming regulatory framework. So the author is making a recommendation कि आपको अगर nuclear policy open करनी है for private participation, you will have to reform regulations. Without such reform, private participation may be limited. Okay. So what would be a valid inference be based on the main point of the author? Main point है कि अगर आपको न्यूक्लियर पावर सेक्टर को ओपन करना है तो you need to reform regulatory framework. नहीं तो limited success. So A, private sector participation in nuclear energy will ensure India's meets its energy goals. No, it will not ensure. It can actually be limited. So will ensure is invalid. C says the risks associated with nuclear energy have declined. Incorrect, not stated in the passage. Renewable energy alone is insufficient, must be substituted by nuclear power in energy in India. We cannot say that it must be substituted by nuclear power. Substituted would mean replaced by. If option D said renewable energy alone is insufficient and must be uh, complemented by nuclear or supplanted with nuclear power in India, that could be a possible inference, but it's still not the corollary. Corollary is option B. Without regulatory reforms, opening nuclear sector may not be successful. Essentially, restating the main point of the author. It's a valid conclusion based on the main point of the author. That is what a corollary is. Question 72. We are talking about how migration has often been understood as an economic necessity or conflict related thing. But according to the author, this understanding is overly simplistic. Migration cannot be viewed solely as a problem or a solution because it's a complex interplay of choice and constraint. Individual decisions are impacted by both visible and invisible factors. Policies that assume uniform motivations कि सब लोग एक ही चीज के लिए migrate करते हैं, maybe climate change, maybe work, those policies which assume uniform motivations fail. So what is the main message? Message should be that migration is not a one thing, it's a complex concept. Many reasons can exist, and policies should not be uniform. So, B says economic conditions remain the dominant driver. No such message in the passage. Message, critical message would be main point. Critical here means not criticism, but important. Okay. So, economic conditions remain dominant would be invalid from the passage. Although migration appears complex, so यहाँ तक तो सही है. It can largely be explained through identifiable patterns. Invalid, not mentioned. B says diversity of migration motives suggests that migration is neither voluntary nor entirely forced in nature. Now, the reason why I've left D unmarked is we're asked the main point of the author. There is nothing wrong in option D except that it is not the main point. right? Main point should be कि ये this is neither voluntary nor entirely forced. It is complex, and policies should not assume uniform motivations. तो ये जो पार्ट है ऑथर के मैसेज का, वो ऑप्शन डी में कवर नहीं किया गया. In fact, option D essentially just restates one fact in the passage, some fact in the passage, fact X from the passage. It's not telling us the main important message of the author. Main important message is contained here, making uniform policy approaches inadequate. Migration decisions arise from many things, individual choices, structural constraints, right? So uniform motivations should not be assumed by the policy. The right answer is option A. This is the last passage question. So global population was growing. Population growth predicts a global population of 9.6 billion. Even if India continues to do well, it is expected that nearly 42% of India's population will still be predominantly dependent on agriculture. Most logical and rational inference we are supposed to draw a valid conclusion. We are supposed to derive a valid conclusion based on evidence. Now, C and D will eliminate first, just for the sake of my explanation. India should take strict measures to control rapid population growth, not mentioned in the passage, an invalid inference. D says India's farming communities should switch over to other occupations. Again, not a valid conclusion based on the passage. I know many of you have gone with option B. Indian economy greatly depends on its agriculture. This is incorrect because if you said in India greatly depends, it would be valid. If you said Indians greatly depend, this would be valid. But I can't say India greatly depends on its agriculture. The reason being, I don't know what share of the pie does agriculture contribute. I know how many people are dependent, right? So if this is GDP, I don't know how much it's contributing to the economy. So if this was employment, then we can say, let's just do this roughly, then we can say this much is dependent on agriculture if it was employment. But B is talking about GDP. I don't know how much GDP agriculture brings. Does it bring only this much, or does it bring this much, or does it bring more? Unknown to us. So the right answer is option A. Prosperity of agriculture sector is of critical importance to India because population will still be predominantly dependent on agriculture. A is the correct choice. All right. So that's it from me. We've covered 4 Anubhav papers. I've discussed all of these in detail. You can find these on our YouTube channel. If you have to go back and solve these, or if you want to go and look at what we do in each inference, assumption, practical implication, corollary, main point, summary questions, I've addressed these over and over again in each of those Anubhav papers. Those are the question types that are going to be key. I've also gone through the method of solving these questions. Remember, for passages, for your passages or VA, verbal ability accuracy, what you need to apply is a methodical, disciplined approach. Discipline मतलब जो मैं बोल रहा हूँ कि पहले ऑप्शन में कोई वर्ड नोटिस करो, फिर उसको जाके चेक करो. Don't go based on something sounds right, something sounds wrong. These factors are going to play a key role. Keep this message in mind that if you want consistent accuracy in passages, it's not about a formula, but it's about solving in a methodical, disciplined manner. Disciplined because the moment there is time crunch, you will be forced to solve in your old autopilot way, and that will lead to errors. So you need to make sure that you practice enough. That's it from me. All the best to all of you all. And make sure that if you need anything, if you need some explanation, do reach out, comment on the video, or go back and see some videos, and we'll be glad to solve those doubts. So thank you, everyone. All the best.